Good evening, everyone. I am Councillor Donna Greenan, the Vice Chairman of the Chair of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting of the committee. Before we commence proceedings, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and any members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. Nobody? Okay. I would also like to advise members that they should only address the meeting by way of their microphones and to remind them to turn their microphone off when they have finished. Are there any apologies for absence? Councillor Cleater?
Councillor Barwick.
Councillor Fort? Councillor Parfitt-Reid?
Councillor Round.
And Councillor Russell?
I think you might have mine, but just in case, Councillor Burke.
Okay, are there any substitute members? Councillor Cleater?
Councillor Cleater for Councillor Barwick.
Councillor Fort?
Councillor Fort for Councillor Trubisky.
Councillor Parfitt-Reid?
Councillor Parfitt for Councillor Round. Councillor Russell for Councillor Burke.
Thank you. Okay, there was an urgent update to item 14 on the amended agenda, Information Governance Report, Annual Report for 2023 to 2024, which I have accepted. This is the annual complaints letter that usually goes with the annual Information Governance Report, but was received after the deadline for the papers. It was circulated on the 26th of July. There was also an urgent update to item 18, the amended agenda, with draft annual accounts 2023 to 2024. These are the narrative report for 2023 to 2024 and the unaudited draft statement of accounts, which were received after the deadline for the papers. They were circulated on the 25th of July. There was also an urgent item today relating to the minutes, part 1 and 2, from the meeting held on the 11th of April 2024, which will be taken as item 9, part 1, and if necessary in closed session as item 21, part 2. Please note the items have been renumbered according to the amended agenda. Does anybody have any questions about those three items? No? Okay, are there any visiting members?
Councillor Cathy Cox just here to observe. Thank you.
Are there any disclosures by members and officers? Are there any disclosures of lobbying? No? Okay. I move that all items be taken in public. However, if members wish to discuss the information contained within item 21, minutes, part 2, of the meeting held on the 11th of April 2024, it will be necessary to move into closed session due to the likely disclosure of exempt information, for the reasons specified, having applied the public interest test. Is this agreed? Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes for the meeting held on the 21st of May 2024, agenda item 8? No. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of May 2024 be approved as a correct record and signed. Is that agreed? Okay. Item 9, minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of April 2024. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Yes, Councillor Cooling?
Thank you. On page 3, right towards the bottom, just above the resolved, that paragraph that starts during the discussion on the report, it gives you the impression that the Parish Council representatives were happy with the Code of Conduct for Maidstone. That was not fair. There's quite a history on this. I'm sure you don't want to hear it. And were there any others here at that meeting? I'm not certain. I request that that paragraph gets struck, except for the last line and a half to read, further works needed to take place to achieve a model which can be adopted by all parish councils without change. I can give as much background as you like, but we were not happy with the version of the Code of Conduct that went to the full council. And it's going to have to be changed or amended or augmented reasonably considerably to be appropriate to parish councils. Thank you.
Councillor Cooling, are you happy for us to remove the paragraph that starts during the discussion and ends with without change? That paragraph, the 5 lines.
Forgive me. Quite happy if you want to remove the whole paragraph. If helpful, we'd be quite happy with the last line and a half. Your call, Chair.
Okay, so the final paragraph in this section 93, during the discussion on the report up to parish councils without change, we propose that whole paragraph is deleted from the minutes. Is everybody in agreement to this happening? Yeah. Okay, I'll take that as agreed then. That was item 8. Okay, so I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of May, 11th of April, I've moved down one, be recorded with the deletion of this paragraph, as agreed. Moving on to item 10, there are no presentations of petitions. Item 11, there are no questions from members of the public. Item 12, we've not been made aware of any questions from members to me as chairman this evening. Okay, item 13, committee work programme. Do members have any comments on the committee work programme? Councillor Coonan.
I'm very sorry, I probably have more time than most to read these, as I'm supposed to be retired. The last couple of meetings of this committee, we have touched on the concerns about IT security, particularly in the time of a lot of home working. And there's still nothing, and I feel that it's quite an urgent subject. If there are enhanced security concerns because of a predominance of home working, it should be viewed as with a degree of urgency by the borough, and therefore I request again, but probably nobody will agree, that it is made a fairly urgent work item for internal audit to review the implications of home working and IT security arrangements. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Cathy Woodward to discuss this matter.
Thank you for that. I think it's probably worth noting in the internal audit report this year, we have just done an audit on cybersecurity, which did touch on that. So the results of that are included within the annual audit opinion, which is going to be agenda item 16 if we've all moved forwards. Home working, all of these items that you're talking about are things that specifically we cover off as part of our internal audit plan. So some of those things that you've mentioned are things that we will cover off in that plan, which was approved back in March. So there's certainly things. What we will do is I will take away your concerns, and obviously they are very high on our risk profile as well.
Councillor Titchener.
Thank you, Chair. Just carrying on that about the home working. We have, or Mason has, a corporate governance policy on efficiency and effectiveness. And I know that home working has been in place for 3 years. I personally don't think it's a good idea, but obviously it does exist. My thought really, Councillor Cooney's already mentioned security, but the other aspects of home working, I think I would like the committee, if possible, to recommend to the council a stricter vetting of who does home working, because there are people who don't necessarily have the facilities at home, if they're living in a flat or a mobile home or a small house, to do home working. And I would have thought it needs to be more rigorously monitored. That's my view on the subject, because efficiency and effectiveness is very important.
Thank you, Councillor Titchener. As we're discussing the item, the actual work programme, we can obviously take the comments back about the internal audit and what we could add to it moving forward. Okay. Does anybody else have any? Okay, Councillor Cleater, we'll move down there.
Home working is the realm of staffing, which is an operational matter and should be dealt with in the appropriate place. We also have recognised trade unions here that ensure that all safety and appropriateness of checks and balances are made on that, so I don't think it's a matter for this committee, to be honest.
Thank you. Councillor Parfitt-Reid, did you want to speak?
I didn't indicate.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a quick one. The Code of Conduct Matters 6-month update, we've got it in November and then we've got it in March, so I just wondered, is that, if it's a 6-month update, that's only 4 months, unless I got that wrong.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Councillor Russell. I can't see any problem with us taking that in September, so we'll bring it forward to the September meeting.
Were there any further comments on the work programme? Okay. Is the committee work programme now noted? Agreed? Great. Okay, we'll move on to item 14, which is the Information Governance Report, the annual report for 2023 to 2024. The report will be introduced by the Information Governance Manager and Deputy Data Protection Officer, Georgia Harvey.
Thank you. Good evening, members. This report provides data on the management of information governance, so that covers complaints, compliments, FOI and EIR, which stands for Freedom of Information and Environmental Information Regulations, data protection and MP's correspondence. You will have seen on your papers there was an urgent item, so just to be clear, there are 2 papers on your desk. First one's the letter. I think this got missed off what got sent to you. Apologies for the confusion. The key thing from this letter is the graphs on the back, and the data from those graphs is reflected on the other appendices you got, and this one did get sent out, and it's on the end column of the Word document you received. Both those documents relate to the LGO's annual complaints report, and this was received after the deadline for submission of papers, hence why it wasn't included initially. A summary of the items from the report. So continuing the theme from last year, there's been an increase again in complaints across all service areas. Again, this is attributed to shifts in the way customers are contacting us, with customers contacting us several times about the same issue, as well as an increase in requests that are unclear and require clarity first before we proceed with them. Performance varied throughout the year. There was an increase in performance from the previous year in terms of responding to stage 2 complaints and rights requests, but the performance in regards to information requests and stage 1 complaints decreased. The decrease is related to 3 main factors. One, similar to 22 to 23, volumes across the service continue to increase and becoming larger and more complex, and the teams required more time to deal with these. There continues to be shifts in the way customers contacted us, as I previously mentioned. And then 3, the team have seen a large number of staffing changes over the past 2 years, and this has continued to have an impact on performance, and this will continue into the start of this financial year, but hopefully should even out towards the end. The key changes arising from the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman Complaint Handling Code are set out in 1.26. These are now the confirmed changes, so at the last annual report we brought you the proposed changes that's now been agreed, and they're the confirmed changes that will now take place. Implementation of the new code has already started, and we've been accepted as a pilot council, so we are working with the LGO to look at how we can implement it in district councils. And then finally, there's been an increase in data breaches. These are largely low risk, which aligns with the general increase in volumes of work we're seeing. To date, the ICO have been satisfied with all the remedial actions we have taken and have not imposed any sanctions, reprimands or fines. Please note there's a typo at 1.31. The figure of 53 is from last year, my apologies. This year's figure is 79, so it should say 79, which reflects the data in the table above. Just to touch on the LGO's annual report, so just as the key takeaway summary is that there are 6 upheld complaints against us from last year, which represents about 0.7% of all the complaints we've processed as a council. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Titcher?
Yes, I mean, I can refer to page 40 on the Code of Conduct which we discussed. Can I mention that? I'd just like to know what the deadline would be. It's under the same heading. Is there a deadline for us to come forward with suggestions for the Code of Conduct? It's under the Appendix A of this.
Can I just ask you to clarify the question, because the next item also covers that?
Well, Appendix A presumably comes under the same heading, does it not? It doesn't.
So, well, should we take it under the next
It's the next one,
then?
is it? Okay.
Is that okay? Did anybody else have any questions? Right. Okay. Councillor Cooch?
Just a question around the increased complexity of complaints and cases that's coming in. I've tried to read the report as much as possible to see which departments they're referring to, but just wondering what that is that's happening, because I assume that doesn't happen kind of in a vacuum compared to other council services, and what's causing them to take longer to respond to. Thank you.
So it's generally across the board. We've seen it across all service areas. We've seen just a general shift post-COVID. It's not just us that's seen it. We know all councils have seen it. What's been really useful as part of the pilot code is actually reaching out to other districts and seeing actually they're seeing similar trends. We know the LGO in general have also seen an increase in complaints that they're processing. So it's not specific to one service area. It's kind of more general across the board. And actually what we're seeing is customers don't always know what they're trying to get out of the complaints process. So we're going back and saying, actually, what do you want us to achieve in this? And then that to and froing it then leads to us going, okay, now we're clear, we'll go away and do this.
Were there any further questions? Councillor Curlin.
Two, if I may. Firstly, on page 7, paragraph 1.4, showing my ignorance, which states that the time limits for responding to these requests is that FOI request and EIR request. So thank you very much. But the main point I would have thought for committee members to consider is page 11, where the local government and social care ombudsman is proposing some changes, and I would point under paragraph 1.25 to 2.2, where complaints should be accepted if they're within 12 months. That is a huge time. My second observation is under 6.13, individuals should not be required to explain their request for requesting a stage 2 consideration. Is that reasonable? I mean, you could. This is enough of a new industry, if you will, that I would have thought that individuals should at least give a reasonable reason for why they want a stage 2. So I point to other members here to consider whether we should actually suggest that 2 of the key changes are not reasonable. The 12 months and the not giving a reason for a stage 2 consideration. Thank you.
Councillor Cleater.
Just a point I'm noticing based on the queries raised, that it isn't just about us in districts, it's the social care ombudsman as well. So those key pointers apply to everything, and in social care it can be a long time before something actually surfaces. So this isn't just about district and county councils, this is about social care as well, and they can be extremely complex. And my understanding is the proposed key changes are for that, and that's my understanding.
Councillor Coonan.
In that case, if we're going to have sympathy with that, perhaps we should actually say, well, do we actually disagree that you don't have to give a reason for requesting stage 2? Is that something that also is reasonable? And I still don't understand enough of why any social whatever issues should take 12 months to raise a complaint. So I would ask members to consider 2.2 and 6.13. We've heard a reason, you've heard a reason why 2.2 may not be unreasonable, but surely 6.13, there should be a reasonable reason given for requesting officers to go in for yet more onerous analysis. Thank you.
Okay.
It might help if I add some context to those two for you. So at 2.2, one of the key reasons that we see that coming up is because an individual becomes aware later on. So potentially with something like council tax, if a change has been applied and they haven't realised until later on in that 12-month window, then we would take it. It's not dissimilar to what we already do anyway. So we already work with departments to look at, actually, is it reasonable to take this? And if we go, do you know what, actually, it's been 12 months, there's nothing else we can do, we will just write back to them and say that. So we don't see that having a huge impact on the day-to-day volume. In terms of the other point you raised, 6.13, we do automatically, if we're unclear, write back to customers and say, we're struggling to understand, can you please explain to us what you want us to achieve? And we will go back to them and say, what do you want out of this process as part of our normal process?
Councillor Cooney?
But am I still able to say, I'm not under 6.13, I'm not prepared to tell you I want a stage 2? Am I allowed to do that without giving any background whatsoever?
Yes, you can. We would likely then go back and say, what would you like to achieve from this?
Would anybody else like to make any comments? Any other members? Okay, nobody else has any comments, so we're required obviously to note the report. So is everybody happy for us to note the report? Is that agreed? Right? Okay. Okay, so moving on to item 15, the annual governance statement 2023 to 2024. The report will be introduced by the Director of Strategy, Insight and Governance, Angela Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So the annual governance statement provides an assurance in relation to the Council's governance arrangements for the previous year. A full description of the evidence and areas for actions are included in Appendix A. This data was gathered from discussion and surveys with our wider leadership team, for which I was assisted by Georgia, who's here tonight. Appendix B lists the areas identified for action last year and the progress that has been made, with progress made for the majority of actions, including the training we carried out to prepare for all-out elections and our annual review of the Constitution. Appendix C sets out the actions for this year based on the review of governance. On page 50, I would like to point out a correction I need to make to update the action. So where it says on introduction of a transformation programme to complete review of transformation capability, it should actually say implement refreshed transformation programme so it matches the action in Appendix A. So I basically I should have cross-referenced it better, so I'll make sure it reflects what's listed as an action. Other actions include responding to the recent staff survey, preparing for the new complaint handling code, which you've just discussed, and monitoring the implementation of recommendations from those audit reports with a weak rating in 2023-24. The next stage with this report, if you're happy, is it will go to the leader and chief exec for sign-off, but I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Councillor Titchener.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's me again. I'm turning over 70 pieces of paper. On the Code of Conduct, as Councillor Cooling mentioned earlier, I just want to know if there's any deadline for this, before that we can produce some more information for you. Because I think it's important, really, ideally, that there's one code of conduct for all the parishes, and you don't get 41 different codes of conduct for the monitoring officer.
I can take that back and speak to the monitoring officer. From what I understand, obviously, we've implemented it for us as a council, so that went through full council and was approved, and our constitution has been updated. I believe it's up to each parish council, so to progress as they see fit, but I will go back and check with the monitoring officer and come back to you. Is there any particular assistance needed by parish councils as our parish council reps?
Chair, may I give an update? Yeah. I'm Vice Chairman of Maidstone Calc, and over the past 2.5 years we did push to have input to the draft of what eventually became Maidstone Borough Council's Code of Conduct, which was accepted at full council on the 17th of July or 24th, whatever. As we had pointed out earlier, there are a lot of fairly detailed issues for that precise text to be used as for parish council purposes. But we, Maidstone Calc, are not asking at this moment for any more input from the monitoring officer. We will take that code as it stands, within our view, some issues, and as I've used before, we will put a sort of half-page context at the top of that, which gives parish councils advice on how to interpret the MBC code. For instance, the MBC code defines the authority as Maidstone Borough Council. So part of our half-page will say, every time you see that, you interpret authority as your parish council. So we will do that so that we're almost future-proof should, if and when Maidstone Borough Council changes its code of conduct again. When there's a meeting at Calc this evening, which I cannot be at because I'm here, it should be reported that the Maidstone Borough Council Code of Conduct has been adopted, and that Maidstone Calc will be issuing to parishes a draft of a Code of Conduct with that extra half page, which would be reasonably appropriate for the parishes to adopt. And we're trying to get all parishes to adopt the same code. Why? Because it makes it easier for your monitoring officer to administer. That is going to take us several weeks, but my personal objective is the next Maidstone Calc meeting, which is about the 30th of September, if I remember correctly. We would hope that by then we'd have had comments back, we'd have run our latest draft by the monitoring officer for comments, and then we would recommend it to all parishes in the hope that all sign up to it to make the administration of this borough easier. But as I say, I register, and hence my sensitivity when it came to the minutes of the meeting. The process has not been 100% easy, put it that way.
Do any other members have any further questions? No? Okay. Is this one? Okay, so this item is for approval. So I'd ask, would somebody like to propose a motion to approve the report? Thank you, Councillor Cleater. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Parfitt-Reid. Is everybody in agreement? Oh, you don't have a vote. I'm not looking at you. Is everybody in agreement? Moving on to item 16, the internal audit report and annual audit opinion for 2023-2024. And the report will be introduced by Catherine Woodward, Head of Mid-Kent Audit Partnership.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So agenda item 16 on pages 53 to 79 of your agenda packs is the internal audit report and annual opinion for 23-24. So if I can just give you a little bit of background into the reports that internal audit bring to this committee. So the first report that we generally bring is our audit plan, which comes in March every year. In November, we provide you with a progress report on that audit plan. And then in July, we give you an annual audit opinion based on the work that we've done in completing that audit plan. So this report is that annual audit opinion. There are three strands to this report I'm bringing today. So the first is the annual audit opinion. This is a statutory requirement as part of the Accounts and Audits Regulations 2015 for me to provide an annual audit opinion. The second part of this report provides a summary of the work completed that supports that opinion. And lastly, the statement of conformance with the standards to demonstrate that we have completed all of our audit work in line with the standards that we are obliged to do so by. But most importantly, it's the annual audit opinion. So in previous reports to the committee, I've outlined progress on delivery of the audit plan, and provided updates as to the likely opinion that I would be delivering, and I am pleased to present a positive audit opinion to the committee today. So if I can just read my audit opinion, the last statement that's included in the report. In my opinion, Maidstone Borough Council has adequate and effective risk management, control and governance processes in place to manage the achievement of their objectives. So this opinion feeds into the annual governance statement, which you have already seen this evening in the previous report. Sections 14 to 25 of my report details the audit work that's been delivered and any other additional sources that I have drawn upon to arrive at my annual audit opinion. The table at section 15 details the audits and their assurance rating. So you'll see from this, there were 3 strong audits, 12.5 sound audits and 3.5 weak audits. All of the audits that have been issued this year have been accompanied with a management action plan to address any issues that have been raised and identified in the audit. So just for context, and our external audit colleagues hopefully will be pleased to hear this, last year we issued 8 internal audit reports. This year we have managed to issue 19 audit reports. So some of the staffing and resourcing issues we had in the team are being addressed, and we are moving towards delivering a lot more work. The table at 22 details progress on actions that have been identified that I just mentioned. So far there are none outstanding, but there are a number that are work in progress or not due yet. All of the audit work that has been completed has been delivered following public sector internal audit standards. Appendix B of my report details the definitions of our audit ratings. Appendix C on page 70 details the summary of the audit findings that have not already been presented to the committee. So if you are missing a couple of them, that's because they went to the committee in the November progress report. The 2 possibly that people will be looking for: property income and facilities management. Appendix D on page 80 details information relating to the Mid-Kent audit team. And I'm happy at this point to take any questions from members regarding the report.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Coonan?
I do apologise. On page 60 of the pack, I would just like to comment on halfway down the subsidiary company governance, and secondly, further down, IT disaster recovery. And for the first one, if I point you to page 72, I suspect it comes into this. You're probably aware that for property that the council owns and that the council wishes to develop, there's clearly a conflict, and the council, quite reasonably, has constructed a memorandum of understanding mechanism between the borough as owner and the borough as developer. And I'm somehow got to be volunteered by this committee in previous life to be the independent member of that. And there's an ongoing enforcement group, as it's called, which consists of some members, some officers, and me. And I have to be there, otherwise it's not quorate. And it's the second one I've been on. The first one, the administration was difficult. The current one, for the life of me, the name escapes me at the moment. It's an old community centre or sports pavilion somewhere or other. This enforcement group, which is expected to meet before various development steps have been taken, it has not met for months. I've pushed for it, so please, there's a fairly urgent, I think, audit issue for subsidiary company governance for the current enforcement group. Shall I pause there, or shall I give this? Okay. The second one, please, if I point you to page 75, IT disaster recovery. Now, this is slightly tongue-in-cheek, but We established that the IT disaster recovery plan, the DR plan, is readily accessible on Teams and OneDrive, ensuring availability to all IT staff members. In a major disaster, you're not going to have that. So it is slightly facetious. I'm assuming the disaster recovery plan is on either self-standing PC somewhere or other or in paper, because if there's a major disaster, you ain't going to have access to either of those. Thank you.
So I'll take your second question first, because that's possibly the easiest to answer. So with regard to the IT disaster recovery, yes, there are other channels other than IT channels available for those members of staff to enact a disaster recovery plan. That is part of the audit that we concluded within there. So at the first point, subsidiary company governance, what you're talking about, your group, that was an operational issue that has been covered as part of the audit. One of the recommendations we made was to ensure that meetings are scheduled and held. So that is something that's occurring, and it will be occurring as we move through the year. It's something that, bear with me, did you say Russell Fitzpatrick? Yeah, so Russell Fitzpatrick is leading on, so that's something that will occur, but I can liaise with Russell just to highlight your concerns.
I've been offered by Ryan O'Connell. I was going to raise a question here under agenda item 10 or whatever it is, but I was told it was inappropriate, so I've been offered the opportunity to raise it at Cabinet or Planning Committee. So because of the urgency, it's not happening for the current one. I think I'll have to pick one of those routes and give it a go. Thank you very much.
Councillor Russell.
Okay, so generally speaking, when we have a high risk recommendation, which we made, which there was one of within the grounds maintenance audit, that requires implementation immediately or within 3 months, I can confirm that that has been done. So the most controversial, shall we say, of the risks that we identified has been addressed. With the medium risk recommendations, we generally expect them to be completed within a 3 to 6 month window. So this audit was completed at the beginning of the year, so we should be coming towards those being completed. We have a follow-up process that we do within our team, and we chase them as soon as they become due to make sure that they are implemented. We then escalate that if they're not implemented through to the wider leadership team and then through to directors as well. So we have quite a robust process for challenging and ensuring some of those, particularly with the weak rated audits. As Angela mentioned earlier in the annual governance statement, it's something that's quite high on the directors list to ensure that we are following up on any of those weak rated audits as well. So as members, you can take assurance from us, and if we don't feel that appropriate assurance or action is being taken, we will bring them to this committee for this committee to determine a course of action to G people along to encourage them to complete their actions that are outstanding.
No,
Thanks.
another question, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I'm back on this time. I just went last time. Yeah, I just suppose then with the actual format of the report, I don't know whether we could put in some actual timelines on that. Because we just see, you know, from the report, we just see that it says high, medium, low, but I think it would be good to just know when that's going to get done by. I know you know, but just for members, that would be really helpful, I think, if we could build that in somewhere. Thank you.
It's something we can consider. You are not the first council to recommend that across the partnership for understanding those timeframes, so it's something that we're going to be working towards to try and give you enough of the right information without overloading you with too much operational information as well. So it's something that we'll look at and see if we can bring to this committee to provide you a bit more assurance.
Councillor Coonan.
A final comment for many new members here. I mean, internal audit has been, it strikes me, one of the strengths of Maidstone Borough Council over the years I've been involved. And I think it contributes heavily to the confidence that I would hope all of us have in the financial rigour, the procedural rigour of this council. So to the extent any of us have raised comments on your report, it is only meant to try and make you a superstar rather than a star. But no, it's a strong element of the borough.
Thank you, Councillor Cooling, and that's something that we do strive towards, as trying to be independent and provide that assurance to you as members, so you can provide it to members of the public as well. That's what we're trying to do, is to join those dots so that you can do your jobs as effectively as you can.
Does anybody else have any further questions? Councillor Dawes.
I see on page 72 there's a mention about private water supplies, and it was identified that 2 supplies, one was carried properly and one was still remaining. So is that's been done? Is it the same as health and safety? Since the report's been done and since you...
Sorry, I was just consulting with my spreadsheet on private water supplies. So yes, that action has been undertaken now. Quite fortuitously, a lot of the actions that we had with Mid-Kent Environmental Protection Team are being completed quite rapidly because they are losing one of their key members of staff. So yes, that one has been completed now.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? No? Okay. So this report is for noting. Oh no, sorry, this one's for decision. Hold on. So is everybody in agreement that we note this report? Yep. Okay, moving on to item 17, Treasury Management Annual Review 2023 to 2024. This report will be introduced by the Finance Manager, John Owen.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance Prudential Code requires the Council to produce a mid-year and annual report to members on its treasury activities throughout the year. The Treasury Management function is also reported quarterly within the Council's budget monitoring reports. This report outlines the Treasury Management function for the year 2023-2024. The 23-24 Treasury Management Strategy was approved by Council on the 22nd of February 2023, and the key elements were utilise cash balances as far as possible rather than loan debt to finance the capital programme in the short term due to high borrowing interest rates, to diversify the current portfolio as much as possible to reduce counterparty risk, keeping investments short-term to meet demand of liabilities when they come due. Investment balance at the start of 23-24 was 8.54 million, and the balances have peaked throughout the year to 61.6 million. The Council had 33.24 million invested in different institutions as at the 31st of March 2024. This was all in call accounts, instant access money market funds and short-term deposits with other local authorities. A breakdown of these investments can be found within Appendix A. Investment income this year totalled 1.072 million during the year. The forecasted UK rates from the Council's Treasury Advisors, which can be seen in paragraph 2.2.5, actually show the bank rates starting to fall from September 2024. This will probably have an impact on investment rates moving forward. On the borrowing side, the Council had loans at the start of the year of £10 million with Public Works Loan Boards and short-term loans with local authorities. Total loan debt at the end of the year was £45 million, all in long-term debt. The Council procured forward borrowing of £80 million 2 years ago on terms of 50-year borrowing through Aviva Life and Pensions at a rate of 2.87%. £40 million of this was received in February 2024, which was partly used to repay the short-term debt, which is the more expensive part of the debt that the Council had, and the remainder being invested in local authorities until funds are required for funding the capital programme. Just as a note, current PWLB rate for 50 years is actually 4.9%. The remaining 40 million of this forward borrowing will be received in the next 2 years, 20 million in February 2025 and another 20 million in February 2026. A full list of borrowings can be found in Appendix A. Along with the Treasury activity for the year, the Council has to report on prudential and Treasury indicators, and these indicators are compared against what was previously estimated within the year. The authorised and operation borrowing limits within the Treasury indicators have both been complied with throughout the year. These can be found in Appendix B. I'm happy to take any questions from anyone you may have. Thank you.
Councillor Titchener.
Thank you, Chairman. I might have missed something that John has just said. It's quite complicated, all of this. But looking at paragraph 2.5.4, capital expenditures 9 million down from the budget. What didn't happen?
Key things that didn't happen in terms of capital was related to the housing programme, particularly Maidstone East and a couple of the other big schemes that had delayed planning in application. So it's all shifted to the right, and we plan to do that in the next year or so.
Councillor Cooney.
I think we all need to bear in mind it was an inspired decision by the borough to set up 80 million facilities at what is now a very, very low interest rate. Looking at the table, page 83 in paragraph 2.2.5, would we as a committee urge the council to consider its next tranche of long-term loans to be decided round about the end of this financial year, looking at the table there, rather than waiting forever for 0.1%, 0.2% reduction in interest rates? Why not remove what is later in this meeting going to come up as a substantial risk that Maidstone cannot fund its capital programme? Why don't you lock in, I'm making this up as I sit here, should we recommend to the council that it locks in another 50 million, 100 million, and it takes that decision? If these rates start looking as if they're reasonable projections, should it lock it in before the end of this financial year, i.e. before the start of the next financial year? A question for this committee: do we applaud what the borough has done to date, and do we encourage the borough to now stay ahead of the game on capital investment by committing the next tranche of forward borrowing around about the end of this financial year? Thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Yeah, I fully applaud it because we did it, but with the previous administration. But my worry as well that we always need to keep in mind is the impact that any capital has on the revenue budget going forward. The revenue budget is quite small, and obviously you need to have a thing in mind that you want to spend the capital on. So just need to be clear that while you're spending it on capital things, you're still meeting the internal rate of return for those projects.
Councillor Cooley.
I'm sure it's an operational matter, you'll remind me in a moment, but the capital programme still looks rather chunky. As we've seen, there is considerable underspend to date. And I'm assuming all projects go through a rate of return criterion, etc., etc. But if we're going to keep in the risk register, which we'll see later in the agenda, if we're going to keep this as a high risk, then to cap the risk, we may have to put up with spending another, I'm making this up as I sit here, £100,000 on interest to have that capital sum sitting on the shelf so that this risk to the capital programme is removed. So point absolutely taken. There's an impact on the revenue budget, absolutely. That's what interest is all about. But we can't maintain there's a risk to the capital programme without wishing to do something about it. And that was the purpose of my question to this committee on should we encourage the borough to take another brave step, as it did, I've lost track of time, a year ago on the £80 million facility. Thank you.
Okay, pass you over to Mark Green to answer that question.
Thank you, Councillor Cooling. We do keep decisions about borrowing and investment under review all the time, and I think it would be premature to do as you suggest at this stage, but I can assure you that it's something that we are looking at literally on a weekly basis, and if a suitable opportunity came up again, then we would take it.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Dawes?
I was looking at page 87 on the investment and borrowing. I was, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like we are lending money and earning an interest rate of 5% plus, and we are borrowing money at 2.8%. Is that correct? So we're doing rather well in that front. Thank you.
Yes, that's correct. Yep, all good.
I had one question I'd like to ask. It was just about the investments. When we're making an investment, how do we look at the ethical standards of what we're investing in? The ethical standards of what we're in ethical.
Yeah, we have there's at the we agree a strategy with members at the start before financial year, which has got a counterparty list, and there's a list of institutions which members sort of can check to make sure that they're sort of happy. In the Prudential Code, we look at security, liquidity and yield in that order. So the institutions have got to be highly rated, and they're all sort of like they're all sort of high business type companies. So yeah, highly ethical and that sort of thing. So yeah, that sort of get on that rating list. So that's what we tend to do. Yeah. Okay.
Are there any further questions? Oh, okay. So this report is for noting. Is everybody agreed on this matter? Agreed. Okay. So item 18, draft annual accounts for 2023-2024. The report will be introduced by the Senior Finance Manager, Paul Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So these are the unaudited draft statement of accounts for the year ending 31st of March 2024. And so this is an opportunity for the committee to review the accounts prior to the external audit and the statement, subsequently coming back to you for final approval. The draft statement was only circulated late last week, so I'm aware that you may not have had time to review it in detail. Should also be noted that this statement doesn't include the annual asset revaluations. We did receive them last week, but there wasn't enough time to process them for inclusion in the statement. But it will be updated for these before the final version is submitted for external audit. Should be noted this won't have an impact on cash resources available to the council. When we process the revaluation figures, the impact is focused on the balances for property, plant, equipment, investment properties and unusable reserves. So the statement itself consists of the following sort of sections. The narrative report is a summary of the council's performance and the financial highlights. And then this is followed by the primary statements. You've got the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. This shows the accounting position and whether the operations has resulted in a surplus or deficit. But it does include non-cash expenditures such as depreciation, for example, which means it will look different from the figures that get reported to the PACs, which don't include these non-cash items. The movement in reserve statements shows the balances the council has in its reserves, split between those that are usable, such as the general fund, earmarked reserves and capital receipts, and those that are unusable, so pensions, revaluation and capital adjustment account. And this is where those non-cash transactions are reversed out to from the income and expenditure statement. And then we've got the balance sheet, which is a snapshot of the council's financial position as at the 31st of March 2024. And in simple terms, that shows what we own and what we owe. That's then followed by the notes to the accounts, and these present additional information to support the figures in those primary statements, as well as some additional standalone notes such as members' allowances and salaries disclosures, for example. And finally, we've got the collection fund, which is a standalone fund, and this sets out the figures for council tax and business rates as part of the council's role as the billing authority, meaning we collect and pass on revenue on behalf of the county council, the police and the fire authority. So in terms of deadlines, the audit of the 2022-23 statement of accounts was only completed in March of this year. So this, along with a long-standing national issue around completing external audits on time, has meant that the audit of this statement has been delayed until October of this year. So the 30th of September deadline for the approval of the accounts by this committee won't be met. There will be a notice published on the council's website to reflect this, and the audited accounts will come back to the January meeting of this committee for your final approval. Notwithstanding that, there are some headline messages that can be highlighted from the statement as it stands. Despite not including the revaluations, you will see there was still a significant rise of 23 million in the value of property, plant and equipment, and this reflects our continuing investment in housing, so the acquisition of land and buildings for future development, and houses that are being used for temporary accommodation. And we also made a significant investment in new vehicles for the waste collection contracts. Another significant movement relates to borrowing investment. As you would have heard John just mention in his last report, we drew down a loan of £40 million last year. But as this was in February, it meant that at the year end we still have most of that available for investment at the end of March. And so that's reflected in the increase in short-term investments and cash equivalents. Keeping those funds invested this way means that it's readily available to fund the level of capital spend that's planned in the current financial year. I think the other movement that's worth noting is the increase in short-term debtors and creditors. This relates to our role as the lead authority in the Kent Business Rates pool, and that reflects monies owed and due from the participants in the pool. Finally, one other thing that's probably worth mentioning is the value of our net pension liability. Those of you that are familiar with our statement from 2022-23 may recall that the value of the liability fell by £65 million from 21-22. This was down to the impact of interest rate changes on the pension fund. As you'll see, the value has fallen again, but rather less drastically, by only £2 million this year. So the recommendation of this report is to note the unaudited accounts as they stand, and once they are finalised, signed off and audited, they will then be brought back to the committee in January for your final approval. So we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Councillor Coonan.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity earlier on to ask questions on the draft. A question, I don't know whether this is for yourself, John, or for Mark. As I understand it, and I may be wrong, audited accounts for a financial year need to be signed off by the September after the end of March. And Maidstone was exemplary for I'm going to get this wrong, 22-23, there were very few local authorities that got their accounts signed off. Excellent. For 23-24, the plan is, presumably subject to external auditors, that you'll get it signed off in January. Apart from external auditor resource, are there any internal MBC reasons why, for the accounts for 24-25, cannot be delivered by September 25? Are there any internal impediments to getting to the regulatory timing? Is it all down to Grant Thornton? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooling. We will always do our best to produce accounts that are reliable and in a fit state to be audited. Plainly, the accounts are subject to audit, and in recent years we've had a lot of queries from Grant Thornton. That's no complaint, they're just doing their job. So I can't stand here and guarantee that we'll have a clean set of audited accounts for 24-25 by September 25, but I can assure you that we'll do our best to present a good set of accounts to Grant Thornton for audit.
Mark, that's absolutely great. But is there any internal, totally under your control, data gathering process, computational process, or whatever that would I fully appreciate questions from Grant Thornton you can't predict, and that could kick your timescale everywhere. But if they had no questions and you had a perfect run, or are your systems sufficient to enable you to deliver within the regulatory timescale, or is there a fundamental impediment to us doing that? And by the way, the performance is great, but can we get better? Thank you.
I believe our systems are reliable, and hopefully that'll be endorsed by Cathy Woodward, because she looks at those as part of the internal audit programme. And I must flag up one risk area which was alluded to in the session earlier, which is around the external valuations of our assets, where that's not entirely within our control because we're dependent on an external valuer. Having said that, we've learned some lessons from the past couple of years, and we'll be going out to tender to look again at who we commission to do those valuations, and we'll have a clear specification of our requirements. So it is something where we're dependent on somebody else, but we're doing our best to mitigate the risks and get the right external firm on board to do the valuations.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Russell?
Just a quick one. On page 33, the external audit costs went up quite a lot between the 2 years. Is that because of all the things where it was getting more complicated and it was all running together, or is that just the nature of the beast now that the whole thing has got more complicated? I don't know, it just seemed quite an uplift.
As you may know, Councillor Russell, the audit contracts are negotiated not by Maidstone Council but by the PSAA, which is a division of the LGA, on our behalf. And what has happened with the latest round of audit contracts is that in order to attract interest from audit firms in carrying out the work, it was accepted that they had to offer a big increase in fees, and that's across the board. That's not just a Maidstone thing, that's happened across the country, and the hope is that that will mean that Grant Thornton and the other firms aren't delivering local authority audits at a loss, and they will be able to properly resource audits. I'm sure Sophia Brown may have more to say on that in the next item on the agenda, but it's something that's happening nationally.
Councillor Dawes?
Can we go back at page 29? I noticed there is a massive drops in income and expenditure between 2023 and 2024. Can I understand why? In the complementary question, yes, in 2023 our income was 5 millions in bracket, 5.5 millions, and in 2023-2024 it's only 2.8 millions.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dawes. It's a combination of two things. One is the actual income that we get from investment properties, and the other is changes in valuations. And one of the factors that affected commercial income in 23-24 was that we had some vacant units at Lock Meadow. So that, I'd need to check the detail, but I suspect that's the biggest element of that fall in income. I'd add, by the way, that so far as 24-25 is concerned, we're making progress with filling those units. We've taken over the former David Lloyd premises ourselves as a council, and we're making good progress with filling the other two big vacant units. So hopefully that will be a one-off blip in 23-24.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Dawes?
Sorry, I had the time to read the paper, so I noticed it's on page 29. That's between 2023 and 2024. The council tax increased by almost 100,000. Is it just due to the houses being built recently?
There's two elements in the increase in council tax income. One is, as you say, the fact that the council tax base has gone up, and generally we expect that to go up by 1 to 2% a year. But the bigger element is the fact that council tax itself has gone up. So the referendum, we've increased up to the referendum limit, which in that year was 3%.
Thank you. I noticed on page 32 about the employments of Maidstone Borough Council, and some of the monies has been spent for exit packages. Some of them are up to 171,000. So I'm a completely new councillor. I didn't realise that there was quite a few of our people that we paid to exit.
Yeah, happy to take that one, Councillor Dawes. There has been an increase in the value of exit packages in 23-24. Generally, these are the result of restructuring within the council, where if somebody leaves, we're legally obliged to pay redundancy. Also, in some situations, if they're a member of the local government pension scheme, we have to top up the pensions that are due to them. But what happens with any restructure like that is that a business case is prepared, and whether the restructure actually delivers value for the council overall is weighed up. So although you're seeing here the costs, generally speaking, there will have been a saving which will justify that to the council in financial terms, either because of saving the salary of the person who's had to leave or some other element. That 171,000, I'm sure you appreciate, is the total of all of the packages. So it's not like it was one payment made to one person or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I do appreciate that. I wasn't aware that there have been a saving by losing some of those members. On page 33, I notice there's a difference of 100,000 between 2022 and 2023 for a fee payable and certified of grant claim and return during the year.
That's the same question that Councillor Russell asked, I believe, about audit.
Fair enough. Sorry. I find it interesting that the grants levels in 2023 got a lot higher than in 2022. It was only 2.3 million in 2022 and 10 million in 2023.
Yes, apologies. I don't have the detailed figures, but Paul and I think that the reason is that in 23-24, we got substantially more in grants for housing. So, for example, at Granada House and some of the other things where we were funded by Homes England and the government's Homes for Ukraine scheme. But I can provide a more detailed analysis.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? No? Okay. So this report is for noting. Is everybody in agreement that we note this report? Yes. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Item 19. The External Auditor's Audit Plan for 2023-2024. The report will be introduced by the Contract Monitoring Officer, Sophia Brown, and Asad Khan from Grant Thornton.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Sophia Brown. I'm the Key Audit Partner with your External Auditors, Grant Thornton, and I shall take the audit plan as read, and when I make references, I'll make references to the page numbers in the plan, if that's helpful. And page 6 of the plan gives a really good summary of the overall audit plan for 23-24. You'll see there we have laid out our significant risks for the audit. So we have 3 significant risks, and these are very standard significant risks for a local authority. There's nothing in there that's specific to Maidstone Council. The risk of fraud and error, you'll notice the first bullet point there in revenue recognition. We rebut that for all of the council's income streams. So that is an inherent risk, but because we have reviewed the income streams and we don't deem them to be risky, we are able to rebut that significant risk and not elevate our testing that we undertake in that area. We have a risk around management override of controls, the valuation of land and buildings, and also the valuation of the net pension fund liability. So the last 2 there, the reason that we identify them as significant risks are because of the high level of estimation involved in those figures within the financial statements. More detail on those significant risks is in the plan on pages 7, 8 and 9. And also on page 10, you'll see we have what we call an other risk, and that is around the completeness of expenditure and making sure that spend is contained within the right financial year. So we do some cut-off testing to address that risk. We have set materiality at this planning stage to be 1.9 million. It's very similar to what we used in the prior year's audit, and it equates to around 2% of the prior year gross operating costs. Now, we will update that once the draft accounts are published on the council's website. So if there are any changes and we deem the change to be significant enough, we might revise the materiality that we use for the audit for 23-24. I've also noted there that we have a level of triviality, which we've set at around 900,000, very similar to the prior year. We bring to your attention any errors or adjustments that have been made that are over that value. So that means that you are aware of all the non-trivial points that have been raised in the audit. And then also councillor's question around the exit packages. So we do deem the exit packages and senior officers' remuneration to be an area that is sensitive and that the public would have an interest in, and we set a lower level of materiality for that, and that's set at 20,000 for an individual officer's remuneration. More detail on materiality is on pages 14 to 16 of the plan. It goes into a bit more detail explaining the different benchmarks that we use. And then in terms of the value for money work that we do for 23-24, we've not completed our planning for that yet. At this stage, we haven't identified any risk of significant weakness. If through our planning we identify risks of significant weakness, I will bring those to your attention. I brought the joint year annual auditor's annual report for 21-22 and 22-23 earlier this year. There were no significant weaknesses that I reported. Page 20 has a summary of the prior year findings. There were a number of improvement recommendations, and in this year's work, we will be following up those areas of improvement. In terms of audit logistics, so we have completed most of our planning. There are some final bits to finish off, which is why we've labelled this as an indicative plan. If through completing the rest of our planning we identify any more risks, we'll bring them to your attention. And as mentioned earlier, the audit is planned to take place from the 1st of October. And we are planning to bring to you an audit findings report and also the 23-24 auditor's annual report to your meeting in January. In terms of the fee, there has been some discussion on that this evening. I think to put it into context, the fee probably now is around about the level it was in 2011 before the abolition of the Audit Commission, if you account for inflation as well. So it's with the past contract, the one that has just expired, the fees were much lower and possibly contributed to the situation we have in local audit at the moment. So the view is that fees needed to get back to a sustainable level to make sure that audits can be completed at the quality required and meeting our external regulator standards. But I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Tishner.
Thank you, Chair. Page 109, significant risk, valuation of the pension fund net liability. I just want to say that I'm very pleased to see the key aspects of your proposed response to the risk. There's a lot of bullet points there, which I think are very good. And my question really is, does this committee see a written report on the evaluations, the assessments, and the procedures, etc., that are being promised to be undertaken?
Thank you, Councillor. So the management does receive what's called an IAS 19 report from the actuary. So that sets out all the procedures undertaken, the assumptions, the results, and we audit that in a great amount of detail. And if we have any questions, typically our questions will be around assumptions and inputs, and also if there are any particular experience items for the year, we'll ask for more information around those.
Is it possible to circulate this to this committee, or is it confidential?
The outcome of the IS19 report is reflected in the draft accounts. So I don't think there's anything you would see in the detail that isn't in the accounts themselves about how the pension liability is calculated. I think the other thing I would say is that we don't actually run the pension fund ourselves, and all of the kind of operating risks and the risk associated with the pension fund's performance are down to Kent County Council, which administers the Kent Pension Fund, on behalf of us and all the other member bodies. So if you really wanted to go into it, I'd suggest you looked at the pension fund accounts themselves.
Councillor Russell?
Sorry, I might just be being a bit dim here, but on the page of 123 of our papers, that says previous year the actual fee charged for the audit was 90,715. But the one that we just saw earlier said 166. But then this year's one proposal is 156. So is it going down, and why is last year's one not the same figures as we got previously?
I mean, although the figures aren't exactly the same as in the accounts, the broad message is the same, that 22-23, the 22-23 fee was significantly lower, as it says on page 123, 90,000. For 23-24, it's going up to nearly 160,000.
But that's not what... In the previous one, it said 22-23 was 166. But here we've got 90. And then this year's one's nearly 166. So are we wrong on the year? Something doesn't seem quite right. Thank you.
So this is one test that we do. We reconcile these figures. So off the face of it, I can't, like you, look at those and say they're exactly what I would expect to see. Possibly in the prior year, I think it's labelled 21-22, but I think it means 22-23. It would have been the fee per last year's plan and might not have incorporated additional fee that we have charged because there were more procedures to undertake. So when we have additional fee, that has to go through PSAA for approval. So the timing could be out on that, and it could have fallen in, part of it could have fallen into the current year that we're looking at. But that is one audit test that we do to reconcile it, to make sure that we're happy with the fee, because the fee comes from us.
Yes, I would just add, I have noticed that unfortunately on page 33 of the draft accounts, the headings on the columns are wrong. So for 21-22, you should read 22-23, and for 22-23, you should read 23-24.
Well, that explains it all, so I'm not going mad. Thank you. I was just thinking that is not the same as that, but now it will be. Thank you.
Councillor Coolin?
I note on page 99 that this committee should consider whether these responses are consistent with its understanding and whether there are any further comments it wishes to make. I have 6 observations or questions. And please, Mark or John, tell me to shut up if you want to answer any particular one. On page 139, there's an extensive list of advisors used for heathlands. Page 139. I do not see any for Lidsing. Should we assume that the heathlands and Lidsing advisors were one and the same? So may I ask that question first?
Okay, would you like to give us the 6 questions as one, and then we can work through them and make notes as we go?
Right, so that's the first one, page 139. Where are the Lidsing consultants? And then on page... No, I'll give that a miss. Right, an observation on page 143. Page 143 is fraud risk assessment. Were there any exceptional sign-off measures adopted during lockdown? And if they were, do they persist? And given the preponderance of working from home, do they represent a risk? So page 143 is about exceptional sign-off as a result of lockdown. Has that been perpetuated, and is it, in the context of particularly working from home, is that a continuing risk? On page 144, item 6, payments to individual suppliers exceeding 40,000 are approved by bank signatories. Now, in my book, recognising, waste is a big contract, buildings maintenance a big contract, and whatever, 40,000 appears to be quite a high figure for bank signatories, and I'm assuming some sort of electronic dual signatory process. So is 40,000 a reasonable figure? Then I would point you to page 146, and particularly item 10, segregation of duties and authorisation protocols. My continuing bleat about whether procedures had to be changed because of lockdown, have they persisted? Do they represent an additional risk given significant home working? Then, goodness me, I might be going towards the end. No, I'm not. Page 156, item 1. Page 56, item 1. What are the classes of transactions, etc., etc., etc.? What about salary rises? Salary rises. Your whole salary package goes up. Presumably, the new Chancellor is going to be fairly generous. So, isn't a salary risk, shouldn't that be in there somewhere or other? Then, actually, it may be my last one, so apologies for them all. And page 160, valuation of defined benefit net pension fund liabilities. We touched on this in the pre-meeting. Given the sheer scale of change in the liability of the past couple of years, from 70 or 80 million pound down to 10 or 12, this 0.1% doesn't look like a valid increase to consider. I would have thought it should be a 1% increase should be the flex figure. And you'll be incredibly pleased to know it's the last one. Apologies for them all.
Thank you, Councillor Cooling. I may call on Cathy to come in with some of these, but first of all, on the advisors that are listed, there's a difference between the Heathlands and the Lidsing projects in that the council itself has sponsored the Heathlands Garden Community Project, whereas it hasn't had that role in relation to Lidsing. Yeah.
Oh, I can get in. Are you telling us, forgive me, that in your officers considering or rebutting or whatever any objections against Lidsing, you did not use advisors? And that's what I mean by that. What advisors were you depending upon to stick to your guns on Lidsing being a garden community within the local plan review?
I would have to go into the detail to provide a comprehensive answer, but the work around the local plan is, of which that work on Lidsing was part, is separate and hasn't involved the use of external advisors to the same extent that the Heathlands project has. And your second point was about exceptional sign-offs during COVID. I don't believe that we relaxed our controls at all during COVID on authorisations. And I checked with Kathy, and she can come in if she thinks to the contrary, but I don't think it's the case that there has been anything of the kind that you're alluding to there. On the £40,000 limit, that is an additional control that we make with payments. With all payments, there are a number of controls that happen at different stages of the process. So if the payment has been subject to a purchase order, that will have had to have been approved. The payment itself will have had to have been approved at an appropriate level. So that additional control on payments over 40,000 is like a backstop to make sure that with large payments that might have slipped through the net, that they're caught. So it's not that everything under 40,000 doesn't have a control process associated with it. On page 146, I think my answer on lockdown procedures is the same, that there weren't any kind of relaxations made as a result of working from home. After all, a lot of the controls that exist happen electronically, so it wasn't that we were having to relax processes when people started working from home. On the point about salary risk, you're absolutely right, Councillor Cooling, that salaries are a big element of our budget. They account for about 50% of our net revenue budget in the council. But of course, there are a whole lot of controls that go around salaries. So individual changes to salaries have to be signed off at a number of different levels by the head of service, by their director, by somebody from within the finance team. At a more general level, the salary settlement is agreed by the head of paid service, the chief executive, but that's following consultation with a range of people, including the unions. So payment of salaries is in no way an arbitrary process. The whole payroll system is subject to a whole lot of controls to make sure that that risk is managed. And finally, on the assessment of risks around the pension valuation by looking at a 0.1% change, I mean, it's not necessarily an exact mathematical calculation that you can do, but I'd suggest that because a figure of, say, £1 million is quoted as the impact of a 0.1% change, you could multiply that up by 10 to get a rough idea of what the impact of £1 million or a 1% change would be. The point is that 0.1% gives you a feel for the effect of changes to the assumptions in calculating the pension liability.
Does that answer your questions, Councillor Titchener? Sorry, Councillor Cooling.
Sorry, I think, Mark, thank you very much indeed for all of the answers. I suspect we'll both be watching anything on pensions in terms of flexing, because the scenario playing we've seen with the bottom end of the range, top end of the range for about 10 parameters, we're anxious to not just go down a best case for pensions liability, but to really understand the flexing from top to bottom of the range, if all of the parameters are flexed to their worst, if you follow me, and all are flexed to their best. What is the width of the liability? But that is not a question, that's what we'll be watching out for. Thank you.
Does anybody have any further questions? No? One question I was going to ask of Grant Thornton was just about the resources available for the audit. How can we know that we've got increased resources available to ensure this will be completed on time?
Thank you, Chair. The resources will be in line with the resource that we had for 23-24, so it's what's needed to complete an audit for the financial statements. We have resource from the 1st of October, as I said, and we anticipate that we would finish the audit before the Christmas break, so that we have everything lined up and ready for the meeting in January.
So, obviously we need to note the external audit report plan for 22, 23, 24. Is everybody in agreement to that? Good. Okay, and we need to approve the management response to the external auditor's planning inquiries. Do we agree with that? Is that approved? Yep, approved. Thank you. Okay. Okay, item 20, budget strategy risk assessment update. The report will be introduced by the Director of Finance, Resources and Business Improvement, Mark Green.
Thank you very much. As members who've been on this committee before will know, as risk is part of the remit of this committee, and financial risk is an important part of that, I've been asked to report regularly to the committee on the budget risks facing the council, and this is clearly an area of concern to members, because we've heard about a lot of authorities being at risk of declaring a Section 114 situation. So this is presenting the risks to Maidstone Council, and we have a budget risk register that's set out in this report, which sets out what I consider to be the risks and gives them a RAG rating. The things I'd highlight in here are, first of all, so far as delivery of the revenue budget is concerned, as you'll have heard, we managed to stay within budget for 23-24. There are certainly risks so far as 24-25 is concerned. Reference has been made to temporary accommodation, which is a volatile budget, demand-led, so that is highlighted as a separate risk in the register. Looking outside the council, there's a number of external risks that we face affecting not just 24-25 but future years, and they're summarised at the top of page 169. There's the external economic environment. At this early stage, it's very difficult to say what the impact of changes in government policy will be on the council. It's worth mentioning that the government is facing a very difficult situation so far as the public finances are concerned, and I would say we are at relatively high risk, being in the southeast and being seen to be in a relatively prosperous area. If there's going to be a rebalancing of resources for local government, unfortunately that probably means moving resources away from authorities like us. And the other big set of risks that the report highlights is around the capital programme. We've got a big capital programme, and there's a number of risks associated with this. First of all, as has been mentioned already, financing it. So we obtained 80 million of finance at a relatively low cost, but when that money is used up, at current rates, it would be much more difficult to fund the capital programme and meet the requirement for the funding to be sustainable. And then there's big risks around delivery of the capital programme. We've got a number of major projects. Construction costs are subject to inflation, so the the report and the budget risk register highlight risks around capital as being one of the top risks that we face. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction, but happy to take any questions or comments that members may have.
Councillor Titchener.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm working in the dark a little bit. In 2022, I got this capital programme here, all listed out, and I understand that every year it's updated. I haven't seen an update. I don't know if there is an update, but it'd be very useful to have an update if it could be sent to me or whether it could be published. Maybe I haven't looked at the agendas sufficiently hard. This was the 17th of January 2022. And I've raised this before, Mark, and I hear what you said a couple of years ago and a year ago. But when we've got a capital programme list like this, and we've got the risk factors of inflation and not having the money to spend on this very important subject, I would like to see a list of capital projects that are prioritised. I know this can be sensitive, and I know it can be difficult, but it'd be useful, I think, for this committee to know quite what the priorities of the council were in terms of capital expenditure, so that there's a list, so we know which ones are at greater risk of being cancelled than others.
The capital programme is updated every year, Councillor Titchener, as part of the budget process. So if you look at the budget book that we publish alongside the rest of the budget papers, and it goes to council in February, and it's on the council's website, you'll see the latest capital programme. As I say, that is updated every year. And so far as the day-to-day monitoring of capital schemes is concerned, this isn't necessarily something for this committee, but it is reported to members, first of all to the policy advisory committees every quarter. They see a list of capital schemes from within their areas, and then those reports then go on to Cabinet. So there is, I suggest, good member oversight of individual capital projects, and members can see if schemes are slipping, if they're overspending. So it is managed in that way. Obviously, there's below that member oversight level, there's all the individual project management that goes on with individual capital projects. So when I was talking about the risk before, I mean, there are a lot of things that are in place to mitigate the risks. That, I think, is the point I'd like to make.
Councillor Cooley.
Yes, if I may, and I'm looking at page 172, the matrix, the coloured matrix. I'll come back to capital programme in a moment, but the three items that are in the black section, top right, i.e. big impact, big likelihood, it strikes me that S, the increase in numbers requiring temporary accommodation, I mean, given your background paper, I mean, that clearly merits a position in the top right corner. But if we were then to take out the cost implication of that, I question why A, failure to contain expenditure within the agreed budget should stay there if you take out as self-standing the S. So I cannot agree, it's not up to me, that A should be in the black area. But then it leaves the capital programme, and again, as we've touched on a few times, the capital programme, if the risk is you cannot finance it, then it's either a question of the borough chopping out some projects, and therefore it will be able to deliver the remainder, or if it's a question that the deliverers of the contract items, builders or whatever they might be, haven't got the capacity, that's a different sort of risk. But for J, that is, the capital programme cannot be delivered because of financing reasons, that is within the gift of the borough to cure by either, if it's convinced that the capital items are justified, get over the relevant hurdles, then get the long-term debt in place, or else they should be pruned out of the capital programme. So I don't see why J should be up there. So it strikes me the big risk for this council, and it's one which, in a sense, I hate to see it because the impact upon a number of residents of the borough is this requiring temporary accommodation. That, in my book, should be the sole one getting maximum officer and member attention in the top right-hand corner. I think the remainder of A should come down, the remainder and J should come down. And my final, another comment, sorry to go on, P, financial impact from major emergencies such as COVID-19. We heard earlier on, the borough made money, I hate to say it, the borough made money out of COVID-19. So and I'm assuming a government of any complexion would somehow apply life support in the event of, heaven forbid, a COVID-19 Mark II. I hate to think we'd make money because I'd hope the government of the day would actually learn that it's too generous, has been too generous. So I don't see why P should stay there. And the final one, final witter, Q. This is the financial impact from IT security failure. Well, if we rate that as high, I'm assuming that our IT, our infrastructure, our servers, our networks, our antivirus, this and the other, our manual procedures or update procedures are sufficiently rigorous. The IT security failure, unless you get what happened recently to airports, etc., our IT should be far more secure and not warrant where P is positioned in the matrix. So, sorry to rant, but I would have thought the borough should be focusing on S, which is temporary accommodation, and the top right-hand corner, and a number of others should be relegated further down the matrix. That's my view. Members probably disagree with me. Thank you.
Councillor Russell?
I was just going to say thank you to the team for controlling all the risks and identifying all the risks. Having been in Cabinet, I do think that they are the main risks. But I would probably argue that everything is a slightly movable feast. Yes, we do need the temporary accommodation, but we need the quality of the temporary accommodation. We also know that it has to go through the planning process. We also know that if it's us sitting on committee with one of our own sites, that can get majorly overspec. So I do agree that you need to also maybe have that controlled, but there are some things that are non-negotiable, such as quality places to live, etc., etc., etc. But all of that has to be considered in the round. And I do think we do need to keep an eye on containing expenditure within agreed budgets. I mean, the whole of the UK is littered with authorities that haven't done that. And at the end of the day, that's how we, continue to exist and continue to afford anything in the capital programme. And I think we do need to be mindful that whether the money comes from central government, local government, some of these grants, it's all taxpayers' money. So we need to make sure that we're using it for whatever scheme in the best way that we can for the residents of the borough. And I think this demonstrates that we have got those items controlled. So I guess I just want to say thanks for the team for making sure that you've got them all on there. Thank you.
Councillor Cooling, next question, sorry.
Well, if I may just remind us all that this matrix and the putting together the monetary estimates, broadest estimates possible, was because this audit committee requested it. I've lost track of time, 3 years ago. But if one has too many risks in any sort of format, risk register this, matrix that, one can actually lose sight of where the key current drive should be. And yes, public money, every penny is important. And yes, budget should be managed. But if you take out the temporary accommodation, the other elements should be very susceptible to management action. So all I'm saying is if you have too many risks clustered to the top right corner, it means nothing, because everything is a problem. Well, we know life is a problem. We should use what we put in place X years ago to actually highlight where members might wish to focus their attention over the short term. I don't diminish any of the risks, but I'm trying to point out there's a scale of risk, scale of what is controllable, and a scale of urgency. Thank you.
I won't come back in detail, if that's okay, Councillor Cooling, but I'll just make a couple of points. I mean, the discussion demonstrates that there is an element of judgment in all of this, in the definition of risks and their rating and so on, and I absolutely accept the various things you've said. I would pick up on one point about the capital programme, which is that the risk there is very high level, I know, but what it's trying to capture is the fact that there is a capital strategy which says, and this goes back to the previous administration, that we're going to deliver 1,000 affordable homes. There are a number of things that could prevent the council doing that, and that's what this is trying to capture. It's being able to achieve the objectives of the capital programme.
If I may, I'm guessing you're hinting of being able to finance the subsidy. If I'm wrong, I apologise. But if that is a factor that's driving major concern, and that is why you're building up a reserve fund, then perhaps that should be brought out as a separate risk. There's a capital programme building the darn things, including 1,000 affordable homes, which I think is a good idea, and then separate that out from the risk of being able to actually finance the subsequent concept of subsidy. The two, building and effectively making it affordable by giving a subsidy, are two different risks, it strikes me. Thank you.
Are there any further comments or questions on this item? No? Okay. Councillor Dawes.
I was just wondering, the temporary accommodations being such a massive risk, is there any particular limit on when the council can say that actually the temporary accommodation is too much of a cost? No. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? No? Okay. So we've been asked to note the report and note the risk assessment of the budget strategy provided. And you're happy to take on Councillor Coyne's comments regarding separating the different risks? Yep, okay. So are we all agreed on that? Agreed? Yep, okay. So moving on to the final item of the agenda, item 21. So this is the minutes of the part 2 of the meeting held on the 11th of April 2024. Obviously, if anybody wants to discuss these minutes, we'll need to move into part 2, but does anybody have any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? No?
There weren't many at the meeting, were there?
No.
Peter, I can't talk for you. I've looked at it and they look fine, but I haven't got a vote.
So in that case, I move that the minutes of part 2 of the meeting held on the 11th of April 2024 be approved as a correct record and signed. Is that agreed? Yep. Okay. I now declare this meeting closed and I'd like to thank everybody for their time this evening. Thank you.